The information provided in this video is strictly for educational and entertainment purposes and does not constitute professional financial, legal, business, or compliance advice. Strategies discussed regarding business-to-business sales, email marketing, software implementation, and regulatory compliance represent potential outcomes based on historical trends and observed case studies in the industry, not guaranteed results. The landscape of digital communication is highly regulated by frameworks such as the CAN-SPAM Act, and every corporate environment is uniquely structured. Past performance or the success of specific case studies analyzed in this presentation does not dictate future success for your organization. Viewers are strongly cautioned to conduct their own thorough due diligence, consult with certified legal and compliance professionals regarding data privacy laws, and independently audit any software platforms, including Apollo.io, before integrating them into their proprietary sales operations or relying on them for revenue generation. Right now, as you watch this, an invisible crisis is actively destroying the sales pipelines of thousands of businesses across the United States. According to recent historical trends analyzing billions of outbound messages, up to 98% of all cold emails sent by sales development representatives are entirely dead on arrival. They are not simply being ignored, they are being actively blocked, routed directly into the depths of the spam folder, or worse, permanently blacklisting the sender's primary corporate domain. We have officially entered an era of a deliverability apocalypse. Early this year, major email service providers like Google and Yahoo implemented the most aggressive, draconian spam filter updates in the history of the internet. They mandated strict domain authentication protocols and established a hard threshold where a spam complaint rate of just 0.3% can result in your entire company being digitally silenced. This means that the traditional, heavily relied upon methodology of sales prospecting, buying massive, unverified lists of leads from shady data brokers and blasting out 10,000 generic, copy and pasted email templates, is no longer just ineffective. It is corporate self-sabotage. Consider the potential outcomes of ignoring these systemic changes. Historical case studies within the software-as-a-service sector reveal a devastating pattern. A typical mid-market company attempts to scale its outbound revenue by hiring a small army of junior sales representatives. They equip this team with a highly fragmented, outdated technology stack, one expensive platform for sourcing contact data, a completely separate application for sending the emails, and a disconnected customer relationship management system to track the mess. The sales representatives, pressured by demanding monthly quotas, resort to the spray-and-pray tactic. They scrape outdated data, load it into their sequencer, and launch thousands of messages into the void. Within weeks, the bounce rates skyrocket because the email addresses are no longer valid. The prospects who actually do receive the emails immediately mark them as spam because the messaging is entirely irrelevant to their current business needs. Consequently, the email providers flag the company's primary domain as a malicious sender. Overnight, the entire organization's communication infrastructure collapses. Not only do the cold emails fail to deliver, but suddenly, critical communications with existing clients, invoices sent by the accounting department, and internal executive memos are all routed to spam. The company loses hundreds of thousands of dollars in pipeline velocity and spends months engaged in the grueling, expensive process of domain rehabilitation. This is the catastrophic reality for sales teams that refuse to adapt to the modern rules of engagement. Yet, despite this high-stakes environment, there is a distinct class of top-performing sales organizations that are experiencing entirely different potential outcomes. They are completely bypassing the spam filters, they are maintaining pristine domain reputations, and they are achieving unprecedented meeting booking rates. They are not doing this by sending more emails, they are doing this by executing extreme precision. What if there was a centralized system that eliminated the need for fractured software tools? A system that not only provided a continuously updated database of over 270 million professional contacts, but also analyzed billions of data points to reveal exactly which of those contacts are actively researching your specific solution right now. What if you could seamlessly transition from identifying high-intent prospects to launching highly personalized, automated, and compliant outreach sequences without ever leaving a single dashboard? This is the exact architectural shift we are dissecting today. We are looking under the hood of Apollo.io, a platform that has aggressively positioned itself as the definitive command center for modern outbound sales. For sales professionals, business owners, and revenue leaders operating in the United States today, the pressure to perform has never been more intense. Marketing budgets are heavily scrutinized, Inbound lead generation is becoming increasingly expensive, and the expectation to generate predictable, scalable revenue falls squarely on the shoulders of outbound prospecting. The problem you are facing right now is not a lack of effort. It is a lack of actionable, accurate data paired with inefficient, dangerous execution. You are likely spending hours every single day manually cross-referencing LinkedIn profiles, guessing email formats, and writing customized messages only to hear absolute silence in return. Alternatively, you are paying exorbitant enterprise fees for legacy software systems that require a degree in data science just to build a simple lead list. This masterclass is designed to systematically dismantle that problem. We are going to explore the comprehensive mechanics of how platforms like Apollo.io attempt to solve the pipeline drought. We will not be rushing through surface-level features. Instead, we are taking a deep analytical dive into the exact methodologies required to architect a high-converting outbound machine. We will examine the critical importance of utilizing buyer intent data to transition from cold outreach to warm, highly relevant engagement. We will break down the precise steps to utilize advanced filtering parameters to build hyper-targeted, laser-focused lead lists that actually convert. Furthermore, we will explore the critical infrastructure of email deliverability, analyzing how to correctly configure your sending domains to ensure your message actually lands in the primary inbox of your target decision maker. By analyzing historical data and observing the workflows of elite revenue teams, we will unpack how to structure multi-channel sequences, how to conduct A/B testing on your messaging frameworks, and how to track the granular analytics necessary to optimize your campaign performance over time. This is about transforming your approach from a chaotic, numbers-based gamble into a refined, data-driven science. To understand this science, we first have to examine the absolute bedrock of any outbound operation, which is the quality of your contact data. Let us talk about the silent killer of sales teams in 2026, which is data decay. We are currently navigating an economic environment where job mobility is at an all-time high. Professionals are shifting roles, companies are undergoing massive restructuring, domains are migrating, and corporate technology stacks are constantly evolving. Historical trends indicate that business-to-business contact data degrades at a staggering rate of roughly 30% every single year. If you are relying on static lists downloaded from legacy data brokers even 6 months ago, you are already operating with a massive structural handicap. Let us look at a hypothetical case study to illustrate this danger. Imagine Michael, a vice president of sales at a mid-sized logistics software firm based in Austin, Texas. Michael allocates $10,000 of his quarterly budget to purchase a static list of 20,000 supply chain executives. He hands this spreadsheet to his junior sales representatives, who immediately upload the entire file into their email sending platform and launch a massive campaign. Because the data is static and actively decaying, 5,000 of those email addresses are permanently inactive. The receiving delivery servers instantly return hard bounce codes. The algorithms governing major inbox providers detect this massive, unnatural spike in bounces, immediately flag Michael's corporate domain as a severe security risk, and instantly route every subsequent email his company sends straight into the spam folder. His entire organization has effectively been shadow banned from the inbox. The potential outcomes of this scenario are devastating, resulting in burned capital, 0 booked meetings, and a crippled domain reputation that requires months of highly technical, expensive rehabilitation to fix. This is precisely where the architecture of Apollo.io fundamentally diverges from traditional list brokers. Apollo does not operate as a static, decaying repository. It functions as a dynamic, continuously updating intelligence graph containing over 270 million professional contacts. However, the raw volume of contacts is completely irrelevant if the underlying data is inaccurate. The true differentiator lies in how this data is continuously verified. Apollo leverages a proprietary, global data contributor network. When thousands of sales teams integrate their corporate email accounts and customer relationship management systems with the platform, the system analyzes the metadata of billions of daily email interactions. If an email sent to a specific contact bounces today, the platform instantly flags that email address as invalid across its entire global database for every other user. If a contact replies and their new email signature reveals a promotion, a different job title, or a new direct dial phone number, the algorithm updates that individual's profile in real time. This creates a massive, crowdsourced, self-healing ecosystem where the data is constantly being scrubbed and validated by the collective daily activity of millions of active users. Having accurate contact data is only the foundational step. The true power of a comprehensive database is fully unlocked through advanced, highly granular filtering. In the highly competitive landscape of 2026, blasting a generic, templated message to every marketing manager in the United States is a guaranteed recipe for failure. You must engineer extreme relevance. Let us break down the step-by-step process of building a highly targeted cohort. Instead of just searching for a generic job title, you begin by layering complex firmographic filters. You might isolate companies headquartered strictly in the United States with a headcount precisely between 200 and 500 employees. Next, you apply technographic filters. This is where you search for companies that have specifically installed competing software on their websites, or perhaps they recently implemented a specific enterprise resource planning tool, indicating a high level of operational maturity. The technographic data is not based on guesswork. The system actively indexes the underlying source code of millions of corporate websites to detect active software deployments and scans public job boards to identify the specific platforms companies are hiring for. You then layer on financial triggers, filtering for organizations that have secured a Series B funding round within the last 6 months, signaling they possess fresh capital to deploy. Finally, you apply persona filters targeting not just a singular decision-maker, but mapping the entire buying committee. You pull the chief financial officer who controls the budget, the vice president of operations who feels the daily pain of inefficiency, and the director of technology who will manage the actual integration. By stacking these specific parameters, you transform a vast, unusable ocean of contacts into a highly specific, easily addressable total available market of exactly 300 companies that perfectly match your ideal customer profile. Even with the perfect ideal customer profile mapped out, reaching out strictly cold relies heavily on timing. You are essentially guessing when these companies might experience a critical problem. This leads us to the most critical evolution in modern prospecting, which is the integration of buyer intent data. Apollo builds highly sophisticated intent signals directly into its filtering engine. This means you are not just looking at static firmographics, you are actively analyzing behavioral economics. Intent data providers track the consumption of digital content across millions of business-to-business websites, industry forums, and digital publications. When multiple employees from a specific target account start reading articles about cloud security compliance or comparing different data storage vendors, that collective activity creates a measurable spike in their intent score. Let us examine the potential outcomes of utilizing this feature. Imagine Sarah, an enterprise account executive working in New York. Instead of calling down a randomized static list, she filters her assigned territory exclusively for accounts showing surging intent for the keyword automated invoice processing. The system reveals 12 specific companies actively researching this exact solution this week. Sarah now knows not only exactly who to contact, but precisely what problem they are desperately trying to solve at this very moment. Her outreach transforms from an annoying interruption into a timely, highly relevant intervention. She reaches out at the exact moment the prospect is experiencing maximum friction, shifting the dynamic of the conversation from pushing a product to consulting on an active, budgeted initiative. Gathering this pristine, multi-layered, highly intent-driven data establishes the scientific foundation of a modern outbound machine. You have mathematically eliminated the guesswork and isolated the exact individuals who have the budget, the authority, and the immediate need to purchase your solution. However, possessing the perfect list is utterly useless if your execution strategy is fundamentally flawed. If you take this meticulously crafted list of hyper-targeted executives and feed it into a poorly designed automated sequence that blasts them with a massive block of generic text, you will still fail miserably. The actual conversion, the precise moment a busy prospect decides to allocate 30 minutes of their valuable time to you, relies entirely on the psychological triggers embedded within your messaging and the technical delivery mechanism of your emails. So how do you construct a dynamic multi-channel sequence that bypasses those aggressive spam filters, captures the immediate attention of a highly distracted executive, and practically forces a positive response? The exact structural blueprint of a high-converting outbound sequence is what we are going to dissect next. The exact structural blueprint of a high-converting outbound sequence requires a complete paradigm shift from how sales teams operated even 3 years ago. Historical trends clearly show that the traditional, highly automated, 7-step email cadence is completely obsolete in 2026. Executive buyers in the United States are currently experiencing unprecedented levels of digital fatigue. Their primary inboxes are aggressively defended by sophisticated artificial intelligence screening tools, and highly trained executive assistants whose core responsibility is to ruthlessly delete unsolicited vendor requests. If you construct an outreach sequence that relies entirely on sending a generic value proposition every 3 days, the potential outcomes are universally negative. Your target prospect will instantly categorize your communication as automated noise, and your corporate domain reputation will rapidly deteriorate as those messages are consecutively ignored or manually marked as spam. To successfully penetrate this defensive barrier, your execution strategy within a platform like Apollo must definitively pivot from volume-based interruption to multi-channel, value-driven orchestration. This is precisely where the software transitions from being a passive data repository into an active, dynamic workflow engine. You are no longer merely blasting emails into the void. You are choreographing a synchronized campaign that strategically surrounds the prospect across various digital environments, creating an organic feeling of omnipresence while strictly maintaining a highly personalized, one-to-one conversational tone. To execute this correctly, we must examine the specific architecture of a modern omnichannel sequence. Relying solely on email is a massive operational vulnerability. Apollo allows revenue teams to integrate their phone systems and their professional social media profiles directly into the sequence builder. Consider the step-by-step construction of a high-retention campaign. Day 1 does not begin with an aggressive pitch. Instead, the sequence initiates an automated task for the sales representative to view the prospect on LinkedIn and interact with a recent post, followed immediately by a highly researched, hyper-personalized introductory email. This email references the intent data we secured in the previous phase, acknowledging a specific business challenge they are likely facing. Day 3 involves a completely different modality. The system prompts the representative to execute a perfectly timed cold call. If the call goes to voicemail, the system automatically drops a pre-recorded, value-driven voice message and instantly triggers an automated email referencing that exact voicemail. Day 6 might involve sending a highly relevant case study that mirrors the prospect's exact industry and company size. By weaving these different touchpoints together, the outreach feels entirely bespoke and heavily researched, fundamentally differentiating your approach from the thousands of lazy, automated scripts flooding their inbox. Let us explore a practical application of this methodology through an imagine-if scenario. Imagine James, a mid-market account executive based in Chicago, Illinois. It is currently the third quarter of 2026, and James is tasked with selling a complex compliance tracking software to human resources directors at healthcare organizations. If James relies on historical, outdated methods, he builds a sequence that starts with the generic email highlighting the features of his software platform, followed by a demanding request for a 30-minute demonstration. The conversion rate on this approach will statistically hover near zero. However, imagine if James utilizes the advanced sequencing capabilities of Apollo, combined with deep personalization variables. James configures his sequence to automatically pull the specific regulatory framework the prospect's company is legally required to follow, injecting that exact terminology into the very first sentence of his email. His opening touchpoint is no longer a pitch. It is an observation of a mutual high-stakes problem. He executes a multi-touch cadence where his phone calls, LinkedIn connections, and emails all carry a unified, consultative narrative. He is not asking for their time to sell a product. He is offering a highly specific insight regarding a compliance bottleneck that intent data shows they are actively trying to solve. The potential outcomes of this unified strategy include dramatically higher open rates, significantly increased reply rates, and a calendar full of highly qualified, intent-driven meetings. The actual written anatomy of these sequence emails is equally critical to the overall success of the campaign. The single biggest point of failure for most sales development representatives is the subject line. Historical case studies analyzing millions of outbound messages reveal that long, capitalized, marketing-heavy subject lines are immediately filtered into promotional folders or deleted on site. In 2026, the vast majority of corporate emails are initially triaged on mobile devices. Therefore, a high-converting subject line must be incredibly brief, ideally between 1 to 3 words, and formatted entirely in lowercase letters to mimic the casual, urgent tone of an internal company communication. Instead of writing a subject line that says "Streamline your healthcare compliance workflows today," an elite performer will use something remarkably simple, such as compliance audit, or simply the name of the prospect's primary competitor. This creates an immediate open loop in the prospect's mind, forcing them to open the message to understand the context. Once the email is opened, the body copy must execute a flawless psychological maneuver. The traditional framework of introducing yourself, introducing your company, and listing your features is entirely dead. The modern outbound email is strictly problem-centric, not product-centric. The opening line must immediately validate the research you conducted. It should highlight a recent trigger event, such as a new round of funding, a specific executive hire, or a recent shift in their industry regulations. You then immediately transition into the impact of that observation, gently illuminating a potential operational inefficiency or revenue leak associated with that event. You are essentially diagnosing a pain point before they even realize how severe it has become. Finally, you must completely abandon the hard call to action. Asking a busy executive in the United States for 30 minutes of their time in a cold email is an incredibly high-friction request. Instead, successful sequences utilize an interest-based call to action. You simply ask if they are fundamentally opposed to learning how a similar company solved this exact problem, or you ask for permission to send over a brief, relevant resource. You are drastically lowering the barrier to entry, making it incredibly easy for them to simply reply with a yes. Furthermore, we must address the structural integrity of the sequence itself to avoid triggering automated spam defenses. Sending the exact same block of text to 500 different people over a 3-day period is a massive red flag for modern email service providers. Apollo mitigates this through the implementation of advanced dynamic variables and algorithmic text spinning. Instead of a static template, a sophisticated sequence utilizes conditional logic. If the prospect works in manufacturing, the system automatically inserts a specific manufacturing case study. If they work in finance, it swaps that paragraph for a finance-specific metric. The system can dynamically alter the greeting, the sign-off, and the internal phrasing of the value proposition for every single recipient. This ensures that even if you are enrolling 1,000 prospects into a campaign, every single outbound email carries a unique cryptographic hash and a distinctly different text structure, perfectly mimicking the behavior of a human being manually typing individual messages. You can meticulously craft the most psychologically compelling, multi-channel sequence in the history of sales. You can leverage the most accurate intent data and utilize brilliant dynamic text variables to ensure every message is uniquely tailored to the recipient. However, absolutely none of this strategic brilliance matters if your fundamental technical infrastructure is actively sabotaging your efforts behind the scenes. You could write the perfect email to the perfect prospect at the perfect time, but if that message is quietly routed to the quarantine folder by a defensive corporate firewall before it ever reaches their device, your pipeline will remain empty. The invisible, highly technical back-end configuration that dictates whether your emails actually reach the primary inbox or disappear into the digital abyss is the most critical, yet least understood, component of modern revenue generation. The exact technical blueprints for configuring your domain architecture and bulletproofing your deliverability are what we must aggressively uncover next. The technical blueprints for configuring your domain architecture are not optional. They are the absolute prerequisites for survival in the current deliverability landscape. Historical trends over the last 3 years have shown a massive paradigm shift. Inbox providers like Google and Microsoft are no longer merely filtering emails based on the words you use. They are actively evaluating the cryptographic reputation of the server that sent the message. The most catastrophic mistake any revenue leader can make today is authorizing their sales development representatives to launch outbound sequences using the company's primary corporate domain. Imagine if Christopher, the chief revenue officer of a thriving cybersecurity firm based in Seattle, decides to leverage Apollo to accelerate his pipeline in the first quarter of 2026. He purchases a massive list of chief information security officers, writes a highly aggressive email sequence, and connects his primary corporate email address to the sending platform. He launches 3,000 emails on a Tuesday morning. Because the list is cold, and the messaging is slightly off-target, a fraction of those recipients drag Christopher's email into their spam folder. Within 48 hours, his spam complaint rate breaches the critical threshold of 0.3%. The algorithmic defense systems at major email providers instantly flag his primary corporate domain as a malicious sender. The potential outcomes of this single operational error are apocalyptic for his organization. By Thursday, the company's automated billing system cannot deliver invoices to current clients. The Human Resources Department discovers that their employment offer letters are bouncing back. Even the internal communications between the executive team are being routed to quarantine folders. Christopher has effectively destroyed the digital communication infrastructure of his entire company simply because he did not understand domain architecture. To completely insulate your primary business operations from this catastrophic risk, you must engineer a decentralized domain strategy. Elite sales teams do not send cold emails from their primary website domain. Instead, they purchase a portfolio of secondary or lookalike domains specifically designated for outbound prospecting. If your primary corporate website is apexsoftware.com, you do not use that domain for Apollo sequences. You acquire apexsoftware.net, get apexsoftware.com, or try apexsoftware.com. You then provision individual workspace inboxes on these newly acquired domains. This creates a functional firewall. If one of these secondary domains receives a high volume of spam complaints and its reputation is mathematically destroyed, you simply discard it, purchase a new one, and your primary corporate communications remain completely untouched and pristine. However, simply purchasing a secondary domain is not enough. Before you can connect these new inboxes to a platform like Apollo, you must establish their cryptographic legitimacy. If you send an email from a newly registered domain without configuring the proper authentication protocols, the receiving server will instantly recognize it as a potential phishing attempt and block the message. You must configure 3 specific DNS records, which act as the digital passport, the digital signature, and the security camera for your domain. The first protocol is the Sender Policy Framework. This is a public ledger attached to your domain that explicitly lists the exact IP addresses and third-party applications authorized to send emails on your behalf. When your Apollo sequence dispatches a message, the receiving server checks your Sender Policy Framework record to verify that the Apollo servers are legally permitted to send mail representing your lookalike domain. If that record is missing, the email is immediately rejected. The second mandatory protocol is Domain Keys Identified Mail. This functions as an encrypted digital signature that is invisibly attached to the header of every single email you send. When you generate a Domain Keys Identified Mail key within your email workspace provider and publish it to your domain's registry, you are creating a lock and key system. As the email travels across the internet, the receiving server uses your public key to decrypt the signature, verifying that the email was not intercepted, altered, or forged in transit. Without this cryptographic signature in 2026, your emails will never see the inside of a primary inbox. The third and most critical protocol is domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance. This is the overarching security policy that instructs the receiving server exactly what to do if an email fails the Sender Policy Framework or Domain Keys Identified Mail checks. Establishing a strict policy demonstrates to global inbox providers that you are a highly sophisticated sender, actively monitoring your domain for spoofing and unauthorized use. Configuring these 3 protocols flawlessly is the non-negotiable foundation of modern outbound architecture. Once your secondary domains are purchased and your cryptographic authentication protocols are perfectly configured, you still cannot immediately begin sending 500 emails a day. A newly registered domain possesses absolutely zero historical sending reputation. It is a completely unknown entity to the global network of spam filters. If you instantly spike the sending volume from 0 to hundreds of messages per day, you will trigger automated rate limits and permanently damage the domain's trust score. This is where the crucial methodical process of IP and domain warming comes into play. Domain warming is the systematic, gradual process of establishing a positive sender reputation by artificially simulating organic, high-quality email behavior. You connect your newly authenticated inboxes to an automated warming network. This network slowly begins sending a tiny volume of emails to other highly reputable inboxes within the network. More importantly, it automatically opens those emails, marks them as important, removes them from the spam folder if they land there, and generates positive, organic-looking replies. You start by sending perhaps 5 to 10 emails per day, incrementally increasing the volume by 1 or 2 messages daily over a strict period of 3 to 4 weeks. During this time, the algorithms monitoring global email traffic observe your domain sending messages that are consistently opened and replied to, which mathematically builds your positive sender reputation. Only after a domain has been thoroughly warmed for a minimum of 21 days can you safely integrate it into your Apollo command center. And even then, the strategic execution must remain highly disciplined. Historical case studies of top-performing sales development teams reveal that they never exceed sending 50 cold emails per day from any single inbox. To achieve high volume, they do not push one inbox to the breaking point, they scale horizontally. They utilize Apollo's advanced mailbox rotation features, connecting 10, 20, or even 50 fully warmed, fully authenticated secondary inboxes to a single campaign. The software then algorithmically distributes the outbound volume across the entire portfolio of inboxes, ensuring that no single domain ever triggers a velocity filter or raises a red flag with the major email providers. By meticulously constructing this robust, decentralized domain architecture, perfectly configuring your cryptographic authentication protocols, and rigidly adhering to the mathematical limits of daily sending volume, you have successfully built an impenetrable deliverability fortress. You have guaranteed that when you finally launch your highly researched, intent-driven, multi-channel sequence, your message will flawlessly bypass the spam filters and land squarely in the primary inbox of your ideal target buyer. But getting the email delivered and read is only the halfway point of the revenue generation equation. When you execute this system correctly, your prospects are going to start replying. They are going to ask aggressive questions, they are going to present complex objections regarding pricing and implementation, and they are going to demand immediate value before they ever agreed to step onto a discovery call. How you handle this critical inflection point, how you systematically categorize these responses, overcome their defensive friction, and seamlessly transition a cold reply into a booked, highly qualified meeting on your calendar, is the ultimate test of a sales professional. The exact psychological frameworks and automated workflow strategies required to master inbox management and objection handling are what we are going to break down step by step right now. The moment a notification illuminates your screen indicating a prospect has finally replied to your carefully orchestrated sequence is paradoxically the most dangerous phase of the entire outbound sales cycle. Historical trends analyzing the behavior of junior sales representatives reveal a massive drop-off in conversion rates at this exact juncture. After spending weeks building the perfect target list and configuring complex domain architecture, the sudden appearance of a human response often triggers panic. The representative abandons their strategic framework and reverts to highly defensive, overly eager, or completely unstructured communication. In the hyper-competitive environment of 2026, an executive buyer is rigorously testing your competence through their initial reply. They are looking for a reason to dismiss you. Therefore, inbox management cannot be treated as a spontaneous activity. It must be executed as a highly systematized psychological operation. Within the Apollo platform, this begins by utilizing the centralized inbox to immediately triage and categorize every single incoming response into distinct behavioral buckets. The first and most common category is the defensive brush-off. This typically manifests as a rapid, seemingly polite dismissal, such as a prospect asking you to simply send over some more information for them to review. The average untrained sales professional will immediately attach a generic 30-page product brochure and consider their job done, only to never hear from that prospect again. The potential outcomes of this passive approach are universally poor. An elite performer recognizes that a request for information is rarely a genuine display of interest. It is a polite delay tactic. To overcome this, you must deploy the information pivot framework. When a prospect asks for more information, you absolutely must provide a resource to satisfy their request and build trust, but you must pair it with a clarifying question that demands a micro-commitment. You reply by attaching a highly specific, one-page case study that directly mirrors their industry, and you follow it by stating that because your platform has dozens of different modules, you want to ensure you are respecting their time. You then ask one hyper-targeted question regarding their current operational bottleneck. You are not asking for a meeting yet. You are lowering the barrier to entry and forcing them to engage in a diagnostic dialogue. Let us look at a practical application through an imagine-if scenario. Imagine David, an enterprise account executive based in Atlanta, Georgia. It is the second quarter of 2026, and David is running a highly targeted Apollo sequence aimed at chief operations officers. He receives a reply from a high-value target that immediately raises a massive defensive wall. The prospect writes that they are currently utilizing a major legacy competitor and are firmly locked into an enterprise contract for the next 18 months. If David relies on outdated objection handling, he might attempt to aggressively bash the competitor or offer a massive, unsustainable discount to break the contract. Both tactics will instantly alienate the buyer. Instead, David utilizes the judo flip technique. He immediately pauses the automated sequence within Apollo, so the prospect does not receive any further automated follow-ups. He then crafts a manual response that first validates their current situation, acknowledging that the competitor they chose is a robust platform. However, David has analyzed historical case studies and knows the specific technical limitations of that competitor. He gently introduces a known operational flaw, perhaps an inability to integrate with the newly released artificial intelligence inventory forecasting tool. He positions his software not as a direct replacement that requires breaking a contract, but as a supplementary integration that fills the exact gap left by their current provider. By shifting the narrative from a hostile takeover to a consultative enhancement, David neutralizes the contract objection and secures a 30-minute discovery call to discuss integration capabilities. Another highly frequent objection you will encounter is the timing delay, where a prospect instructs you to reach back out in the third quarter or early next year. While occasionally genuine, historical data suggests this is almost always a polite deflection masking a lack of perceived urgency. You must systematically uncover the underlying reality. You achieve this by respectfully challenging the timeline. You agree to their timeline, setting an automated reminder within Apollo to re-engage them in 6 months. However, you add a critical postscript to your message. You ask them directly if a specific metric, such as labor costs or compliance risk, is expected to shift dramatically between now and the third quarter, or if this initiative is simply paused due to current bandwidth constraints. This pattern interrupt forces the prospect to stop and actually articulate their internal business logic. Frequently, this uncovers the true objection, which might be a lack of budget or a pending executive transition, allowing you to address the actual problem rather than passively accepting a false timeline. Managing these complex, nuanced conversations at scale requires leveraging the automated workflow capabilities built directly into the software. You cannot rely on human memory to handle the sheer volume of replies generated by a well-oiled outbound machine. You must build specific rule sets within Apollo to manage sentiment automatically. For example, if a prospect replies with explicitly negative sentiment or utilizes regulatory keywords demanding removal from your database, the system must instantly and flawlessly change their contact status to do not contact. This is not just a best practice. It is a strict requirement for maintaining compliance with digital communication regulations and protecting your carefully warmed domain architecture from destructive spam complaints. Conversely, if the system detects positive sentiment or a question regarding pricing, it should automatically assign a high priority tag to the conversation and route it directly to the most senior representative on your floor for immediate intervention. When you successfully navigate these objections and the prospect finally agrees to a conversation, the transition from the email thread to a secure meeting on your calendar must be utterly frictionless. A massive mistake at this final stage is sending a naked calendar link and forcing the executive to do the administrative work of finding an open slot. You are demanding effort from someone who owes you nothing. The highest converting framework involves proposing 2 highly specific times in their local time zone, based on your availability, and then softly offering your scheduling link as a secondary, optional convenience. You make it exceptionally easy for them to simply reply with the word Tuesday. By mastering these psychological frameworks, you transform the chaotic, unpredictable nature of human replies into a structured, predictable conversion engine. You are successfully building lists, bypassing spam filters, and actively booking qualified meetings on your calendar. Your outbound machine is officially generating revenue. But as your operation scales, a dangerous new problem emerges. When you have 20 different sequences running simultaneously, targeting 5 different industries, and utilizing dozens of different messaging variations, how do you mathematically prove which components are actually working? If your meeting booking rate suddenly drops by 3%, how do you isolate the exact variable causing the leak? The transition from running a successful campaign to managing a scalable, data-driven revenue operation requires mastering deep analytics, rigorous split testing, and the complex visualization of your pipeline metrics. The exact methodologies for auditing your performance and mathematically optimizing your entire system are what we must aggressively decode next. The exact methodologies for auditing your performance and mathematically optimizing your entire system are what we must aggressively decode next. To operate a high-performing outbound engine in 2026, you must completely abandon the concept of relying on gut instinct or sales intuition. Scaling an unoptimized process does not lead to more revenue. It merely accelerates the speed at which you burn through your total addressable market and destroy your domain reputation. The transition from a chaotic guessing game to a refined science requires treating your Apollo account not just as a sending platform, but as a rigorous laboratory. Every single email dispatched, every cold call logged, and every LinkedIn connection request sent is a distinct data point that must be tracked, measured, and evaluated against historical trends. The first foundational step in this optimization process is completely redefining which metrics actually matter. For over a decade, sales teams obsessed over email open rates. However, relying on open rates as a primary indicator of success is now fundamentally flawed and incredibly dangerous. Because of the aggressive rollout of email privacy protections and the widespread adoption of artificial intelligence security bots by enterprise firewalls, open rates are massively artificially inflated. A security server will automatically open and scan your email the millisecond it arrives to check for malicious links, triggering a false positive open pixel before the human recipient even logs into their computer. Therefore, if you are making structural changes to your messaging based solely on open rates, you are optimizing for the behavior of a machine, not a human buyer. To evaluate true campaign health, elite revenue teams focus exclusively on downstream revenue metrics. They track the positive reply rate, the meeting booked rate, and the ultimate conversion to qualified pipeline. These are the undeniable mathematical indicators that your messaging is actually resonating with a human decision maker. Once you establish the correct baseline metrics, you must implement a continuous cycle of rigorous split testing, commonly known as A/B testing. A major operational failure for average sales teams is launching a sequence, letting it run for 3 months, and then wondering why the results are deteriorating. The market is dynamic, and buyer fatigue sets in rapidly. You must constantly challenge your own baseline performance. Within the Apollo platform, you can actively pit 2 different variations of a sequence against each other to mathematically prove which one generates a higher positive reply rate. However, a critical mistake many representatives make is testing too many variables simultaneously. If you change the subject line, the opening hook, the value proposition, and the call to action all in the same test, and variation B wins, you have absolutely no idea which specific change actually drove the improvement. You have learned nothing repeatable. A scientifically valid split test isolates a single variable. Let us explore a practical application of this methodology through an imagine-if scenario. Imagine Jessica, a director of demand generation at a financial technology firm located in Denver, Colorado. In the third quarter of 2026, Jessica is targeting chief financial officers at mid-market retail companies. Her current Apollo sequence has a baseline positive reply rate of 1.2%, which she needs to double to hit her quarterly pipeline targets. Instead of rewriting the entire email, she initiates a strict A/B test focusing exclusively on the call to action. In variation A, she uses her standard, high-friction close, asking the prospect for a 15-minute introductory call next Tuesday. In variation B, she deploys a low-friction, interest-based call to action, simply asking if the prospect is opposed to seeing a brief, 2-page financial model detailing how similar retailers are currently consolidating their vendor spend. She enrolls exactly 500 identical prospects into each variation to ensure statistical significance. After 2 weeks, she analyzes the data. Variation A maintains the historical trend of 1.2%. Variation B, however, generates a positive reply rate of 3.8%. By isolating one single sentence, Jessica has mathematically tripled her meeting booking potential without increasing her sending volume or risking her domain reputation. This level of granular analysis must be applied to every single touchpoint within your multi-channel sequence. You must utilize the step-by-step reporting dashboards to conduct a thorough sequence drop-off audit. This involves analyzing the exact stage where prospects are disengaging. For example, your data might reveal that your initial email generates a highly respectable engagement rate, but step 3 of your sequence, which requires your sales representatives to execute a manual cold call, has a 0% conversion rate. This specific data visualization immediately diagnoses the bottleneck. The problem is not your list quality or your overall value proposition. The problem is specifically isolated to your cold calling script, the time of day those calls are being executed, or the fundamental training of your representatives on the phone. By pinpointing the exact location of the failure, revenue leaders can deploy targeted coaching and script revisions rather than needlessly overhauling the entire campaign. Furthermore, sophisticated optimization requires deep cohort analysis. You cannot look at your sequence performance as a single, homogenized number. You must segment your data based on firmographic and demographic variables to uncover hidden patterns. A specific messaging framework might generate an incredibly high conversion rate when sent to vice presidents of marketing at companies with under 50 employees. But that exact same message might trigger massive unsubscribe rates when sent to chief marketing officers at enterprise organizations. Apollo allows you to filter your campaign analytics by industry, company headcount, and specific buyer personas. By cross-referencing these data points, you can identify exactly which subsegments of your total addressable market are responding most favorably to specific value propositions. You can then duplicate the sequence, tailor the language explicitly for the underperforming segments, and systematically elevate the conversion rate across your entire territory. By aggressively leveraging these analytical frameworks, you stop guessing and start engineering. You are constantly refining the psychological triggers in your messaging, mathematically proving your hypotheses, and building an outbound machine that becomes incrementally more efficient every single week. You are successfully turning raw data into predictable revenue. However, operating this sophisticated, highly optimized engine entirely inside of a vacuum creates a massive new operational hazard. If your Apollo command center is isolated from the rest of your corporate technology stack, you are forcing your sales representatives to engage in hours of manual data entry, creating dangerous information silos, and completely blinding your executive leadership to the true source of their revenue. The critical infrastructure required to seamlessly integrate this outbound machine with your overarching customer relationship management system, ensuring flawless bidirectional data synchronization and completely automating your administrative workflows, is the exact architectural bottleneck we are going to dismantle next. The exact architectural bottleneck we are going to dismantle next lies in the critical space between your prospecting platform and your overarching system of record. You can build the most mathematically optimized outbound machine in the world, complete with pristine data and high-converting messaging, but if that machine operates in a completely isolated silo, your revenue operation will eventually collapse under its own administrative weight. Historical trends observed within the software-as-a-service sector demonstrate that highly scaled sales teams frequently lose up to 30% of their active selling time to manual data entry. When your Apollo command center is physically disconnected from your primary customer relationship management system, such as Salesforce or HubSpot, you are actively forcing your highly paid sales development representatives to function as glorified data entry clerks. They are spending their valuable hours manually copying and pasting contact information, transcribing email replies, and trying to remember to log their cold call dispositions. This manual process introduces catastrophic human error into your pipeline forecasting. When an executive board asks the chief revenue officer for an accurate projection of the upcoming quarter, they are basing their financial decisions on data that is fundamentally flawed, delayed, or entirely missing because a representative simply forgot to update a status field. To solve this operational crisis, we must execute a flawless bidirectional data synchronization between Apollo and your central database. Bidirectional means the flow of information is a continuous two-way street. The customer relationship management system must act as the absolute single source of truth for the entire company, while Apollo functions as the aggressive system of engagement. When these two platforms are perfectly aligned, every single action taken within Apollo is instantly mirrored in your database without a single human keystroke. If a representative sends an email, the exact text of that email, the precise timestamp of delivery, and the subsequent open or reply data are automatically logged onto the activity timeline of the specific contact record in your database. If a cold call is made, the platform automatically pushes the call recording, the duration, and the call disposition code directly into the CRM. This creates an environment of total transparency. Your account executives, your customer success managers, and your executive leadership team have immediate, real-time visibility into the exact chronological history of every single interaction your company has ever had with a specific prospect. Let us examine the potential outcomes of this integration through an imagine-if scenario. Imagine Marcus, a highly ambitious outbound representative working for a logistics technology firm in Chicago, Illinois. It is the fourth quarter of 2026, and Marcus is managing 300 highly targeted accounts. Without a bidirectional sync, Marcus spends his Friday afternoons cross-referencing his Apollo outbox with his Salesforce accounts. He realizes he forgot to manually log a crucial email reply from a chief supply chain officer who expressed deep interest in an enterprise contract. Because the system of record is blind to this interaction, the marketing department accidentally enrolls that exact same executive into a highly generic, automated newsletter campaign over the weekend. The executive receives a mass marketing blast immediately after engaging in a highly nuanced, personalized conversation with Marcus. The prospect feels alienated, assumes the company is disorganized, and the massive enterprise deal is permanently lost. Now, imagine if Marcus operates within a properly architected revenue environment. The bidirectional synchronization is perfectly configured. The moment that Chief Supply Chain Officer replies to the Apollo sequence, the system instantly detects the positive sentiment. It automatically updates the lead status field in Salesforce from actively prospecting to engaged. It immediately assigns a high-priority task to the corresponding account executive and simultaneously pulls that specific contact out of all overarching marketing automation campaigns. The entire corporate ecosystem seamlessly adapts to the behavioral signal of the buyer in real time. Marcus does not spend a single second on Friday afternoon performing manual administrative tasks. Instead, he spends those hours aggressively prospecting his next tier of target accounts, mathematically increasing his total pipeline generation. Executing this integration requires precise technical configuration, specifically regarding the strict mapping of standard and custom fields. A massive mistake revenue operations leaders make is utilizing the default, out-of-the-box integration settings. You must map your data with extreme intentionality. It is not sufficient to simply synchronize a first name, a last name, and an email address. You must build custom objects within your customer relationship management system to house the advanced intelligence generated by Apollo. You must map the specific buyer intent scores, the exact technological platforms the prospect is currently utilizing, and the specific behavioral triggers that initiated the outbound sequence in the first place. For example, if Apollo detects that a target company has recently hired a new chief information officer, that specific trigger data must be seamlessly mapped to a custom field in your database. This ensures that when the meeting is successfully booked and the account executive opens the opportunity record, they are not staring at a blank screen. They possess a rich, highly contextualized intelligence dossier that dictates exactly how they should structure the upcoming discovery call. Furthermore, true bidirectional synchronization acts as a critical defense mechanism against disastrous communication overlaps. In a large organization, it is highly probable that multiple representatives might inadvertently target the same massive enterprise account simultaneously. If an account executive is currently in late-stage legal negotiations with a specific company, and a junior representative simultaneously launches a cold Apollo sequence targeting a different department within that exact same company, the potential outcomes are heavily destructive to the deal velocity. The prospect will perceive your organization as chaotic and misaligned. A flawless integration prevents this entirely. You configure strict exclusionary rules within Apollo that constantly read the account status in your database. If an account is marked as an open opportunity or a current customer in your system of record, Apollo automatically blocks any representative from adding contacts from that specific domain into an outbound sequence. The system physically prevents your team from cannibalizing active deals. By eliminating manual data entry, engineering total pipeline visibility, and structurally preventing communication overlaps, you elevate your outbound operation from a localized tactic into an enterprise-grade revenue engine. You have successfully captured the attention of your ideal buyer, managed their objections, booked the meeting, and seamlessly transferred all of that critical context into your central database. Your machine is functioning flawlessly. However, the ultimate success of this entire complex architecture hinges entirely on what happens next. The moment the calendar invite is accepted, the responsibility shifts. The prospect transitions from the high-velocity world of the sales development representative into the highly consultative environment of the closing account executive. If this critical transition is fumbled, the entire outbound effort is completely wasted. How you systematically manage this internal handoff, how you ensure the prospect does not feel like they are starting the conversation completely over from scratch, and the specific internal processes required to maximize the conversion from a booked meeting into closed revenue, are the precise structural mechanics we must dissect next. The precise structural mechanics we must dissect next center entirely around the concept of continuity of intelligence. When a prospect accepts a calendar invitation, a fragile psychological contract is formed between the buyer and your organization. Historical trends analyzing business-to-business purchasing behavior in the United States demonstrate that up to 40% of highly qualified pipeline is permanently lost during the initial transition between the sales development representative, who booked the meeting, and the closing account executive, who conducts the actual presentation. The root cause of this massive financial leak is a highly destructive phenomenon known as discovery fatigue. A senior executive has just spent a week exchanging highly contextualized, nuanced emails with your prospecting representative. They have revealed a specific operational vulnerability and agreed to allocate 30 minutes of their highly valuable time to discuss a solution. If they log onto a virtual meeting on a Tuesday morning and the account executive begins the conversation by asking generic foundational questions about the size of their company, the nature of their industry, or the specific software they are currently using, that fragile psychological contract is instantly broken. The buyer immediately realizes the internal communication within your organization is completely fractured. They feel disrespected, their defensive walls immediately go back up, and the potential outcomes rapidly shift from securing a lucrative enterprise contract to receiving a polite, dismissive rejection at the end of a painfully awkward 30-minute call. To completely eradicate discovery fatigue and architect a seamless transition, elite revenue organizations deploy a highly structured, digitally enforced handoff protocol that leverages the exact data architecture we established in the previous phase. The customer relationship management system, having been perfectly synchronized with Apollo, becomes the central intelligence hub for the closing representative. Long before the camera ever turns on, the account executive must conduct a rigorous forensic pre-call analysis. They do not merely glance at the prospect's name and job title. They dive deep into the specific chronological timeline of the outbound sequence that generated the meeting. They analyze the exact email subject line that finally prompted the executive to open the message. They study the precise call to action that triggered the positive reply. Furthermore, if the meeting was booked via a cold call, they listen to the entire audio recording of the conversation executed by the junior representative. They listen carefully for the exact tone of voice, the specific vocabulary the prospect used to describe their internal bottlenecks, and the precise moment of friction that caused them to finally agree to the calendar invite. Let us explore a practical application of this methodology through an imagine-if scenario. Imagine Robert, a senior enterprise account executive at a rapidly scaling cloud infrastructure firm based in Boston, Massachusetts. It is the middle of the year 2026, and Robert is aggressively preparing for a massive discovery call with the chief technology officer of a regional commercial banking institution. If Robert operates blindly, relying entirely on his sales intuition, he logs onto the call and asks the executive to broadly describe their current data storage architecture. The executive immediately sighs, having already explained this exact technical limitation to the junior representative 3 days prior. The momentum is instantly destroyed. However, imagine if Robert utilizes the full spectrum of Apollo intelligence that has been seamlessly routed into his dashboard. Robert sees the exact intent data signals generated over the last month. He knows this specific bank has been aggressively researching data migration protocols for the past 3 weeks. He studies the technographic data pulled by Apollo, clearly indicating they are currently locked into an aging legacy on-premise server environment. He reads the exact email thread where the prospect explicitly admitted to the junior representative that their recent internal compliance audit highlighted a severe vulnerability in their data retrieval speed. When Robert initiates the virtual meeting, he completely bypasses the traditional, agonizingly slow introductory phase. He instantly validates the preceding conversation. He explicitly states that he thoroughly reviewed the comprehensive notes from his colleague and understands they are currently navigating the immense complexities of a legacy on-premise infrastructure, while simultaneously researching modern data migration protocols to solve their specific compliance audit vulnerabilities. The psychological impact of this opening framework is extraordinarily powerful. The executive instantly relaxes and leans into the conversation. They realize they do not have to spend the first 15 minutes educating Robert on their business. Robert is already thoroughly educated on their specific microeconomic reality. The entire dynamic of the conversation instantly shifts from a traditional, adversarial vendor pitch into a highly collaborative, peer-to-peer consulting session. Robert has successfully leveraged the outbound intelligence gathered by Apollo to manufacture immediate trust and establish profound clinical authority within the first 90 seconds of the interaction. Executing this level of precision requires a mandatory internal framework often referred to as the pre-call intelligence brief. In high-performing sales environments, the sales development representative does not simply throw a newly booked calendar meeting over the fence, collect their commission, and move on to the next target. They are structurally required by management to fill out a comprehensive intelligence dossier within the central database before the handoff is considered officially complete. This dossier forces the junior representative to explicitly articulate the specific business pain they uncovered, the perceived urgency of that problem, and any potential competitive software platforms the prospect happened to mention during the initial dialogue. If this specific dossier is incomplete or lacks sufficient detail, the internal system is designed to physically prevent the meeting from officially transferring to the account executive. This strict operational protocol forces absolute accountability between the two distinct sales functions, ensuring the closing representative is never walking into a strategic ambush or wasting their highly compensated time on an unqualified prospect. Furthermore, the account executive must proactively use the Apollo platform to map the peripheral terrain of the target account immediately prior to the discovery call. A massive, recurring mistake made by average sellers is assuming the single person on the calendar invite possesses the unilateral authority to sign a six-figure software contract. Historical case studies analyzing modern business-to-business purchasing dynamics reveal that the average enterprise buying committee in 2026 consists of roughly 6 to 10 distinct stakeholders. While Robert is preparing for his highly strategic call with the Chief Technology Officer, he is simultaneously utilizing the advanced persona filters within Apollo to aggressively identify the rest of the invisible committee. He locates the exact name and contact information of the Chief Financial Officer, who will ultimately need to approve the capital expenditure. He identifies the Vice President of Engineering, who will be forced to manage the complex daily implementation of the software. He pinpoints the Director of Information Security, who holds the absolute ultimate veto power over any new external software integration. Robert is actively building a comprehensive organizational chart, identifying the specific individuals who are not present on the current calendar invite, but who will absolutely dictate the final purchasing decision. By flawlessly executing this seamless intelligence transfer, immediately validating the prospect's prior interactions, and mapping the overarching organizational buying committee before the virtual meeting even begins, you mathematically maximize the probability of advancing the deal to the next logical stage. You have successfully transitioned a cold, hesitant outbound lead into a highly engaged, deeply validated pipeline opportunity. However, successfully completing an initial discovery call and delivering a compelling product demonstration is merely the opening sequence of a highly complex, high-stakes chess match. The moment Robert ends the virtual meeting and closes his laptop, he faces an entirely new set of monumental challenges. He must systematically engage the other 6 members of that invisible buying committee who were not present on the call. He must aggressively prevent the deal from stalling in the dreaded zone of the status quo. And he must leverage the exact same outbound automation platform to surgically multi-thread the account, strategically surrounding the entire executive team with perfectly timed, highly relevant insights. The advanced psychological strategies and multi-threading frameworks required to navigate a complex, highly regulated enterprise sales cycle and push a massive, stalled deal across the finish line are exactly what we are going to master next. To master these multi-threading frameworks, we must first confront the most statistically dangerous trap in modern business-to-business sales, which is the illusion of the solitary champion. Historical trends analyzing millions of closed-loss deals clearly indicate that relying on a single enthusiastic point of contact to navigate a highly regulated corporate purchasing environment is a primary reason why massive enterprise contracts die inexplicably in the pipeline. In the complex economic landscape of 2026, corporate buying committees are operating under extreme financial scrutiny and are fundamentally risk-averse. A mid-level director might absolutely love the technical demonstration of your software, and they might verbally assure you that the deal is fully approved, but they rarely possess the unilateral political capital or the ultimate financial authority to push a 6-figure contract through a rigorous procurement department. If you rely entirely on that one individual to act as your internal salesperson, to perfectly articulate your complex value proposition to their executive board, the potential outcomes are almost always negative. Your champion will inevitably face aggressive internal objections from their chief financial officer regarding the budget, or they will be blocked by the Chief Information Security Officer regarding data privacy protocols. Because your champion is not a professional salesperson, they will fail to overcome those internal objections, the communication will suddenly go completely dark, and your forecasted deal will stall indefinitely in the catastrophic zone of the status quo. To systematically prevent this silent pipeline death, elite sales organizations utilize Apollo not just as a top-of-funnel prospecting tool, but as a surgical mid-funnel account orchestration platform. The exact moment a primary discovery call is successfully completed, the strategic methodology must immediately shift from linear communication into aggressive, lateral multi-threading. You must systematically surround the entire executive buying committee with highly tailored, distinct narratives. Let us explore a practical application of this complex strategy, through an imagine-if scenario. Imagine Amanda, a strategic enterprise account director at a sophisticated supply chain analytics firm based in Dallas, Texas. It is the third quarter of 2026, and Amanda has just concluded a phenomenal 60-minute product demonstration with the vice president of logistics at a massive, publicly traded manufacturing conglomerate. The vice president is thrilled and requests a formal pricing proposal. If Amanda follows the outdated, fatal methodology of single threading, she sends the proposal and waits passively for the vice president to secure the internal signatures. 2 weeks pass with absolute silence, and the massive deal slips into the next quarter. However, imagine if Amanda instantly deploys a highly engineered multi-threading playbook using her integrated Apollo command center. The morning after the successful demonstration, she does not just follow up with her primary champion. She immediately transitions back into the Apollo database and isolates the exact corporate hierarchy of the target account. She explicitly identifies the Chief Financial Officer, the Chief Information Security Officer, and the Chief Operating Officer. She then enrolls each of these distinct executives into parallel, highly customized outbound sequences that are specifically designed to proactively neutralize their unique departmental objections before those objections can ever be raised internally. The true architectural brilliance of this strategy lies in the extreme personalization of the messaging frameworks deployed to each specific persona. You absolutely cannot send the same generic follow-up email to the entire executive board. Amanda configures her Apollo sequence targeting the Chief Financial Officer to focus strictly on financial modeling and total return on investment. Her messaging explicitly references her ongoing conversation with the Vice President of Logistics, stating clearly that they are actively collaborating on a project to reduce outbound shipping delays. The email to the financial executive completely ignores the technical features of the software and instead highlights a specific historical case study demonstrating how a similar manufacturing conglomerate reduced operational waste by 14% within the first 6 months of implementation. She is actively providing the financial justification required to approve the capital expenditure. Simultaneously, the parallel sequence targeting the Chief Information Security Officer carries a completely different narrative tone. This executive does not care about shipping delays or financial returns. Their singular mandate is mitigating institutional risk and protecting corporate data. Amanda's automated touchpoints to this specific persona immediately address enterprise-grade security protocols, attaching comprehensive documentation regarding their software compliance certifications and data encryption standards. She proactively offers a technical scoping call to review the integration architecture. By executing this simultaneous multi-channel strategy, Amanda is strategically dismantling the invisible internal roadblocks. When her primary champion finally brings the software proposal to the executive committee for a formal vote, the remaining board members are not looking at an unknown, high-risk vendor. They are looking at a highly professional organization that has already proactively addressed their specific departmental concerns, mathematically accelerating the deal velocity and drastically increasing the probability of a closed-won contract. Executing this sophisticated multi-threading operation at a high volume requires absolute mastery of the advanced automation rules embedded within the Apollo platform. You cannot rely on human memory to manually trigger these complex parallel sequences at the exact right moment. You must engineer account-based plays that are strictly dictated by the opportunity stages in your synchronized customer relationship management system. You configure the software so that the exact second Amanda moves the opportunity stage in her database from demonstration completed to proposal delivered, the Apollo system instantly and automatically triggers the executive alignment sequences for that specific target account. The platform automatically pulls the newly mapped executive contacts, seamlessly injects the dynamic variables referencing the primary champion, and dispatches the customized messaging without requiring Amanda to click a single button. This level of extreme automation ensures that the multi-threading strategy is executed flawlessly and consistently across every single enterprise deal in the pipeline, eliminating the margin for human error. Furthermore, this continuous mid-funnel engagement acts as a highly sensitive radar system for identifying hidden internal resistance. If Amanda's multi-threaded emails to the financial department are consistently being opened multiple times and forwarded internally, the Apollo tracking pixel provides her with immediate, real-time intelligence indicating that a massive internal financial debate is actively occurring. If the system alerts her that the target account is suddenly exhibiting surging buyer intent data for a direct, lower-cost competitor right in the middle of the negotiation phase, Amanda instantly knows she is being actively price-shopped. She can immediately pivot her strategy, intercept the competitive threat, and deploy specific defensive collateral to secure the perimeter of her deal. By flawlessly executing these multi-threading frameworks, aggressively mapping the invisible buying committee, and proactively neutralizing departmental friction, you systematically drag massive, complex enterprise deals out of the status quo and directly to the finish line. You have generated the lead, you have navigated the objections, you have delivered the perfect demonstration, and you have achieved complete executive alignment across the entire target organization. The contract is sitting on the desk, waiting for a final signature. But there is one final ultimate hurdle that destroys thousands of sales professionals every single day. The absolute peak of the sales mountain. When all the decision makers are finally at the table, how do you handle the ruthless, highly trained procurement department? How do you navigate their aggressive pricing demands, mathematically defend your profit margins, and execute the final closing frameworks required to secure the revenue without heavily discounting your product? The precise psychological tactics and advanced negotiation mechanics required to conquer procurement and officially close the deal are exactly what we are going to master next. The precise psychological tactics and advanced negotiation mechanics required to conquer procurement and officially close the deal begin with understanding the fundamental mandate of a procurement officer. In the corporate ecosystem of 2026, a procurement department is absolutely not evaluating the technical merits of your software, the brilliance of your user interface, or the incredible relationship you have painstakingly built with their vice president of logistics. They are explicitly compensated, evaluated, and promoted based on their strict ability to mathematically reduce vendor spend, mitigate contractual risk, and commoditize your solution. When your meticulously crafted proposal finally lands on their desk, their entire objective is to artificially manufacture competitive pressure and demand a massive immediate discount. If you enter this critical phase utilizing the exact same collaborative, highly consultative tone that you utilized during the initial discovery phase, you will be systematically dismantled. Historical trends across the enterprise software sector demonstrate that sales representatives who blindly accept the initial pricing pushback from procurement sacrifice hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential commission and severely damage the operational profit margins of their own organization. To successfully navigate this high-stakes, adversarial environment, you must fundamentally shift your posture from a consultant to a tactical, data-driven negotiator, anchoring your entire defense on the undeniable mathematical intelligence you have continuously gathered throughout the entire Apollo-driven sales cycle. To systematically dismantle their strategy, we must first examine the most common and highly effective psychological trap utilized by professional corporate buyers, which is weaponized silence. When you submit your final pricing proposal, a highly trained procurement officer will frequently sever all communication for weeks. They will completely ignore your follow-up emails and send your phone calls directly to voicemail. The potential outcomes of this tactic are devastating for an untrained sales representative. The representative begins to panic, assuming the deal is entirely dead, or that a competitor has swooped in at the last minute. Driven by pure anxiety, the representative inevitably caves, sending a desperate email offering an unsolicited 20% discount simply to generate a response. The procurement officer has successfully extracted a massive financial concession without uttering a single word. You must never fall into this trap. Instead, you must leverage the invisible behavioral tracking mechanisms embedded within your Apollo command center. When you send the pricing proposal via a tracked Apollo link, the system provides you with real-time, granular intelligence regarding exactly how that document is being consumed. You can see precisely when the document is opened, how many times it has been forwarded internally, and exactly how many minutes the procurement team has spent analyzing the specific pricing tier page. If the communication goes dark, but your Apollo dashboard clearly indicates the procurement team is opening your proposal 3 times a day and forwarding it to the legal department, you possess absolute mathematical certainty that the deal is highly active. You do not panic, you do not offer unsolicited discounts, and you confidently maintain your total radio silence, forcing them to eventually break the standoff and come to the negotiating table. Let us explore a practical application of this data-driven defense through an imagine-if scenario. Imagine William, a strategic account executive at a predictive analytics firm operating out of Seattle, Washington. It is the 4th quarter of 2026, and William has successfully navigated a brutal, 6-month sales cycle. He utilized Apollo to build the initial list, bypassed the draconian spam filters, aggressively multi-thread the buying committee, and secure unanimous executive approval for a massive $300,000 annual contract. The deal is officially transferred to the procurement department. The lead procurement officer immediately emails William, aggressively stating that their internal budget is strictly capped at $200,000 and explicitly threatening to award the entire contract to a lower tier, legacy competitor if William cannot immediately meet their price. If William acts emotionally, he destroys his own credibility. Instead, William deploys the exact data architecture he built within his customer relationship management system. He schedules a mandatory review call and physically presents the internal engagement metrics to the procurement officer. He displays the exact chronological sequence data proving that the Chief Operating Officer and the Chief Financial Officer have already extensively reviewed and explicitly approved the specific return on investment business case attached to the $300,000 price tag. He utilizes the historical technographic data pulled by Apollo to calmly remind procurement that their current, outdated infrastructure is actively costing their organization $50,000 every single month in pure operational inefficiencies. William is not emotionally arguing about price. He is mathematically defending the agreed-upon corporate value. He strategically isolates the procurement officer by mathematically proving that delaying this specific contract to evaluate a cheaper, inferior competitor will actually cost their company significantly more money in unmitigated operational waste than the massive discount they are currently demanding. Even when you successfully defend the primary valuation of your software, procurement will inevitably attempt to extract smaller, highly tactical secondary concessions. They might aggressively demand extended payment terms, massive blocks of free implementation hours, or dangerous opt-out clauses that completely neutralize your revenue predictability. You must never concede a single contractual point without flawlessly executing the strict give-get framework. If a procurement officer demands a net 90 payment structure instead of your standard net 30 terms, you absolutely do not simply agree to maintain momentum. You state clearly that you can potentially accommodate their extended payment terms, but in direct exchange, you require a rigid, multi-year contract commitment paid entirely upfront, or you strictly require the target account to participate in a highly public, co-branded marketing case study within the first 90 days of deployment. You mathematically and strategically balance every single concession. You transform their aggressive demands into strategic leverage points that ultimately increase the total lifetime value of the contract. By enforcing this rigid psychological framework, you actively train the procurement department that your organization operates as an equal, highly sophisticated counterpart, not a desperate, commoditized vendor. In the final, agonizing hours of a massive enterprise deal, when negotiations become hyper-tactical and progress completely stalls over minor legal language, elite revenue teams deploy the ultimate escalation protocol, which is strategic executive alignment. Because you aggressively utilized Apollo to multi-thread the target account and meticulously map the entire organizational hierarchy, you already possess the direct contact information of their chief executive officer and their overarching board of directors. You absolutely do not reach out to them directly to complain about the procurement department. Instead, you orchestrate a highly strategic peer-to-peer introduction. You have your own chief executive officer send a brief, highly personalized email directly to their chief executive officer. This strategic communication completely ignores the ongoing negotiation friction. It simply expresses profound professional excitement about the impending strategic partnership and heavily highlights the massive operational value both overarching organizations will achieve upon final launch. This top-down communication instantly alters the internal political dynamics of the target account. The procurement department suddenly and unexpectedly receives immense internal pressure from their own chief executive officer to immediately finalize the legal paperwork and execute the partnership. You bypass the bureaucratic roadblock entirely by strategically elevating the conversation far above the transactional level. By flawlessly executing these advanced negotiation mechanics, holding absolutely firm on your mathematically proven value, ruthlessly enforcing the give-get framework, and strategically deploying executive alignment, you finally conquer the procurement phase. The master service agreement is officially signed, the contract is fully executed, and the massive enterprise revenue is officially secured. You have successfully taken a completely cold, unaware prospect from a dynamic Apollo intelligence list, navigated the treacherous waters of aggressive spam filters, bypassed highly trained executive assistants, orchestrated a flawless multi-channel sequence, handled aggressive defensive objections, delivered a highly tailored demonstration, multi-threaded and invisible buying committee, and mathematically defended your profit margins against professional corporate negotiators. You have built a highly scalable, predictable, and data-driven outbound revenue machine that fundamentally transforms how your organization captures market share. However, the exact moment that massive contract is signed, an entirely new, highly dangerous ticking clock immediately begins. The transition from a newly signed enterprise contract to a fully adopted, heavily utilized software deployment is mathematically the most vulnerable period in the entire customer lifecycle. If your internal onboarding process is fractured, if the senior executives who originally championed your product suddenly disengage, or if the end user simply refused to log into the platform, your massive, hard-won enterprise deal will inevitably become a catastrophic churn statistic exactly 12 months later. The precise architectural blueprints for utilizing post-sale intent data, engineering flawless customer success workflows, and systematically identifying massive expansion and upsell opportunities within your existing client base long before they ever consider churning are exactly what we are going to deeply master next.